Thank you again, everyone, for joining this Kinaxis webcast on Purposeful Collaboration. Our speakers for today's webcast are Alan Lepofsky, VP and Principal Analyst from Constellation Research, and Trevor Miles, our VP of Thought Leadership here at Kinaxis. Starting us off today will be Alan Lepofsky.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. I'm very excited to be here today to talk about how collaboration has an impact on the supply chain and sales and operations. We're going to focus really on how these tools and the culture of all of this sharing come together and allow you to really change not just what's going on inside your organization, but across all the teams you work with that make up part of your job that fulfill this supply chain work. So let's dive in and start talking about how these tools are going to impact your life. To start with, let's focus on communication. So obviously, sharing information is nothing new. We have a picture here from, hieroglyphic days where storytellers would embed information and pass down knowledge and, we call it tribal knowledge to their peers and their families and their followers. And this is how information was shared and stories were told. But there's inherently some pretty big problems with this style of sharing, is there not? First of all, it's really difficult to update and make changes to. And second of all, it's very hard to share with people. People had to come to this information. You had to come to where a cave was or tablets were or where walls were painted. And we live in this beautiful digital age that allows us to do things much more collaboratively. It lets people work on sharing information and stories and reach a much broader audience than you ever could in the past, and that's what's sort of exciting about it. Now, communication, as I've said, is sort of just more along the lines of storytelling. It's passing information. It's passing knowledge. And what we want to do is we want to get from just that pushing information to a more collaborative nature. Collaboration, by definition, I'm sure you all understand, co-labor, to work together. And the beauty of collaboration is how people can team to solve a specific problem or launch a product or solve an issue or fulfill a customer demand. It's teams working together that's exciting, and that's where the power of today's digital age really comes together in ways we couldn't do in the past. We're going to look at the tools that are available to do this and how culturally we're sort of shifting to be a much more open and transparent and sharing-centric sort of world. So let's start by looking at what the tools are that are at our disposal. We call it the evolution of these collaboration tools. What most of you, may be using today or your organizations are using today or what we've done over the last few years is focus on things like email and chat. That was sort of the first generation. And as we know, these tools are primarily based on not just one-on-one conversations, but more that they are focused on pushing information. We know that email is a great tool for getting information out there and sharing things, but it's not the best tool for co-authoring a document or sharing files or responding back to customer demands. It gets difficult for other people to find. It's locked away. It's people that aren't involved in that conversation can't get access to that information. A new hire comes on, they don't instantly have access to all of the things that are in your inbox. Chat and email are very siloed away. They're very specific to the people that are involved in them. So fast forward that to sort of the next generation of tools that popped up, and we have these great ideas for blogs and wikis. And I'm sure you're all familiar with blogs, maybe not as many of you with wikis, but blogs for the first time gave everybody a voice. It was the first time anybody could start storytelling online where they could share information and they could say, here's what I want to talk about, and people could comment right in line. They didn't go back and forth the way you do via email, but right at the bottom of that blog post, you could share your comments, your feedback, your edits, your stories, your annotations, etc. And blogs gave everybody the ability to have this big open conversation. Now, blogs started to be used not only by brands and customer support organizations, but by internal employees that had a great idea. Say the HR department that wanted new hires to share their experiences and give the audience a fresh set of eyes about their conversation. So blogs became a very, very powerful tool. Now, a close cousin to blogs is wikis. Most of you, if you're not using wikis at work, will be familiar with the concept of Wikipedia, the world's largest online encyclopedia, where anybody can create a document and share information. But the difference between a blog and a wiki is, in a wiki, people edit the actual content. You don't just edit add comments at the bottom, but you actually edit the content itself. And these tools became really powerful. These really kind of helped us move along the continuum of the things that we could do to share. But all of a sudden, we started to find this need for even more immersive, collaborative environments. And there's constantly an argument back and forth in the industry about what is more important to help people share information, ask questions, share news, things like that. Is it culture? Or is it technology? Is it the tools Alan just talked about, like blogs and wikis? Or is it the people that are actually working with these things? Is it the generations of new employees or things like that? And in my opinion, it's actually both. It's really important that we have sort of this yin-yang sort of mentality where these two things come together to form an environment where inside your company you're going to share. So from the technology standpoint, let's look at some of the things that are happening recently. We have the cloud, which is, as everyone talks about these days, a lot of hype around the cloud, but essentially what that means without any technical details is that all of the information, the blogs, the wikis, things like that, are available at any time on any device. You don't have to download specific clients or have things that are different from Mac or Windows. This information is available at any time and syncs across different devices. So if you're sharing files or if you're creating documents or things, the cloud is really important. Mobile obviously is a huge impact. Mobile has given us the ability to access this information and our colleagues anytime, anywhere. We know that huge amounts of information are being created and consumed via mobile devices. We see it as we walk down the street. We see it as people are in meetings. The ability to access your information via mobile is substantial. Tablets are, also a big thing, kind of group those together with mobile, but not just that it's a tablet, that's what's not interesting, it's this touch interface. The fact that we're changing away from typing in information and doing things to clicking and swiping and all sorts of different gestures that make it easier to consume and create content. And on the bottom left here, we have wearables. We're starting to see things like glasses and wristbands and rings and all sorts of different objects that allow us to access things. So technology is really fueling our ability to share. Now, but technology is only part of it. Technology are the tools that enable us to do it. But if people don't want to or know how to, all the technology in the world is completely useless. And that's where culture comes in. And over the last few years, we're seeing a dramatic shift in our intent and purpose and desire to share information. We're calling it, the Facebook generation or Twitter generation, where we're sharing everything we do. We're sharing our videos, our photos, our user profiles, our job resumes, what we were working on yesterday. Everything is being shared, your location, checking into places. And all of these things in our personal life start to work their way into the business world, just like email did. It started in our consumer lives and it worked its way into work. Chat, some of you may remember AOL Instant Messaging, and then we got chat tools at work. Security cards, all of these things that happen in our consumer life that work their way into our business world, the same thing is happening with these collaboration tools. So we're starting to see Facebook and Twitter-like user experiences inside our organizations. So who are we seeing do this? I think this is really important for us to discuss here. Is this just the new breed of employees? Well, I think not. There's constantly this conversation that may be taking place inside your companies, it's certainly taking place in the media, that talks about this incredible emerging part of your workforce called the millennials. And to be quite honest with you, with all of our research at Constellation, we're finding that it isn't actually that important what generation people are from. It's not when they were born that dictates how proficient they are with using these technologies. Instead, it deals with what we call their digital proficiency. Now, digital proficiency is a great way of ranking where people are with their comfort and with their knowledge of sharing information. This digital proficiency is made up of those two tenets that I just talked about, the first being knowledge. So where do you gain knowledge from? Your educations, your experiences, and how often you have access to technology. To discount the 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-olds inside your organization is just, a massive mistake. These people have skills and experiences that the millennials do not have yet, whether it's technology experiences, coding experiences, experiences with elements of the supply chain that work and those that don't, logistics and shipping. To discount someone's knowledge and say that only the new millennials are going to have this impact on their workforce is not the right approach. Similarly, you have to take into account someone's comfort level. And this is where maybe the 20-year-olds are currently a little more proficient than 40s and 50s and 60-year-olds, but not necessarily. So comfort level comes from how much you trust using a technology or how much you believe in how it's going to have an impact. It has your own personal desires. Comfort is more sort of the surreal properties, where knowledge is more the intellectual properties. Now, these things combine and form what we call your digital proficiency. And we're going to take a look at how you map to these things in the next slide. So think about your comfort level and your skill level mapped onto a matrix. As an analyst, we love doing these four-box charts. So what would a presentation be without them? But I want you to follow along here and think about yourself for the next minute as I sort of talk about what's happening. And then we'll extrapolate out not just you, but all of your employees to sort of get a pulse of where you think your company's at. If we look at knowledge and comfort, at the bottom corner we have this category where you're not really good at something. So your knowledge is low and your comfort level is not very high. So you're not really wanting to do something. So knowledge low, comfort low. And as we work our way through this chart, you'll see that these things grow. So you have, not good at something but are interested in it, or really good at something but scared to actually do it, or really good at it and want to do it. Now, these categories are going to make more sense in just a second as we talk about work, because what we want to do is we want to take these categories and we want to map your employees onto these. So let's look at the first one. In the first quadrant, we look at these people that are called holdouts. Remember, their knowledge level is a little bit low and their comfort level is a little bit low. So a holdout is someone who resists the shift to these new ways of working. They're centered around email and documents and sending around attachments, and they're not really excited yet about the blogs and wikis and social networks and Facebooks and mobile devices and wearable computing and all of these different things. These are the holdouts, the curmudgeons, the people that are staying the way they are. They believe, why change? If it's not broke, don't fix it sort of mentality. Then we have the second category of people. We call these digital immigrants. These people don't have a ton more knowledge than the holdouts do yet. They haven't really been trained on the tools. They're not using them a lot, but they're eager. They really want to start using these things. Their comfort level is high. Their engagement is excited. They really know that they want to improve that sort of crossing the chasm mentality. They want to become early adopters of these technologies. Dead center in the middle of everything. So kind of skilled, but not an expert. Kind of comfortable, but not really scared of doing something, are the voyeurs. These are the people that recognize change is occurring. This is most people. This is dead center, that middle 50% of the population. They recognize things are changing. They're going to watch. They're going to participate as they can, but they're not going to be the first out there. They're not going to be the champions. They're not going to be the early adopters. They're not going to be the laggards, though. They're kind of just watching, and they want to know where things are going to go, and they want to be active. Then we have the people that are really skilled with things, but uncomfortable with them. And that may be an interesting one for you to understand. Like, what do you mean I'm really good at something, but I'm not comfortable with it? These disengaged people, think of as a perfect example as people who really understand security well. They know the implications of privacy and authentication and digital identity, and that's why they stay away from things like Facebook. They say, I'm not going to use these tools because I'm worried about the terms and conditions. So these aren't, people that don't know what they're talking about. These are the most skilled people. These are the people with a lot of knowledge, but because of it, it's almost that, you know, ignorance is bliss mentality. These people know too much, so their comfort level is actually low. They're paranoid. They're skeptical. And then finally, the digital natives. These are the people that are extremely comfortable with technology. They want to be doing everything. They buy the latest mobile device. They work at home. They, you know, understand all of these technologies, and they know how to use them, and they want to teach people, and they want to do all sorts of things. You know, this is great. This is sort of the nirvana that you want to get people to. And what's exciting is you think about your environment and your office and how these collaboration technologies can impact the way you work. I want you to think about mapping from one category to another. If you increase a holdout's knowledge level, you'll move them up towards being a voyeur. You know, their comfort level stays about the same, but their knowledge level increases. If you don't really increase their knowledge level, but you coax them into how and why and where they could be using tools, they sort of start to go from being a holdout to an immigrant. And I'm not going to go through each of these categories, but I think you can see that those journeys take place from all of these categories. If you increase a disengaged person's comfort level, they become a native. If you increase both knowledge and comfort of a voyeur, you know, they become a native, etc. So,
Trevor here. So
hi, Trevor.
What I'm fascinated by this, in fact, as I'm looking at it, is this diagram is relevant as much for when email was first started as it is today with the social networks. So there were the people who were reluctant to go from writing a letter on a piece of paper and posting it to writing it on a computer and emailing it. I still am old enough to remember when there was a lot of skepticism around a signature on a fax machine, whereas now we allow digital signatures on documents. So all of this movement of people into these different categories, it's not just about social media, it's about the adoption of technology throughout the period of time. Am I correct in my understanding on that?
Absolutely. I love that. This is not specific to the new world of work. This is a framework that we've created that talks about any time there's a technology shift. I'm with you. You know, I'm one of those people that does remember trying to get people off of, you know, overhead projectors and start using slides, and stop using Office Vision for email and starting to use more modern email techniques. You know, stopping using, you know, landlines and moving to voice over IP. You nailed it, and that's why it's so critical to point out that this isn't specific to millennials. This transformation occurs all of the time, and the people that have been through these transitions and shifts in the past may be your most important workers, the people that can help with the current shift. And to discount these people, it really frustrates me when I read articles in the news and in the industry about, you know, preparing for your millennial workforce or the differences that millennials want versus others. You know, I think from a digital perspective, that was true a decade ago. But now that mobile devices and social networking are prevalent for everybody, when you're, you know, your parents and your bosses and everybody inside the organization understands Facebook and Twitter, then why is it any different for the 20-year-olds? You know, when I'm getting text messages from people of all generations, not just my nephews, I realize that these technologies are no longer specific to age groups. And, you know, I think you absolutely nailed it. My most important thing I would say is if we don't learn from our past, we're bound to repeat those same mistakes. And the things that made it hard to move from the older tools to the newer tools are just going to repeat themselves. So we really have to covet all the people inside all 5 of these categories and think of where they are. And that leads to a great transition for a second here. You know, we've presented this framework. You've explained that this is, you know, relevant to the, you know, all sorts of technology shifts. Let's take a moment and pause. Let's actually poll, you know, all of you in the audience here for a moment. Where do you think you fit in at work in this? You know, we're going to bring up a poll, and I want you to answer. On the bottom right corner of your WebEx meeting, you should see the ability to click on one of the options. We have another 20 seconds or so here. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about, where do you fit in? When a new technology is rolled out inside your organization, are you a champion that's helping others use it? Or are you just sitting there going, nah, I'm used to the way I do things, I'm not going to change? And, you know, for the sake of argument, you can actually be in more than one category for some of these things, but let's try to think of an overall impression of how you're doing. and we're going to leave this poll up for a few more minutes, and I'm going to transition on to the next slide, and then we'll take a look at those results. So now that I sort of explained the categories of these digital workers and how we're shifting and trying to get people to be digital natives, it leads us to the next step of evolution inside the tools we're using at work. And these are what we call enterprise social networks. So they're like the social networks you have in your home, Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and whichever other ones you happen to be using, but these are the tools you use at work. So these are those same collaborative environments, but imagine being at work and being able to share valuable information. It's not about sharing cat pictures or telling people what you had for lunch. It's about getting real business work done, but not via email and file attachments. It's not about doing Facebook at work. It's about breaking down the silos and taking the locks off the information, the locks off your inbox. Remember I talked about earlier that information shared via email is locked away. Nobody else can discover it. Nobody else can search it. What if information and conversations were available to everybody inside your organization? What if when you discovered what your competitors are doing, you posted a document on your company's intranet or social network instead of emailing it to just your team? What if you had a question that you wanted to ask and you didn't know who to go to? What if you were able to post that question openly and have everyone across your entire organization have the ability to respond back and share their knowledge? What if you wanted to share a product video? Or what if you wanted to provide a status update of something that's broken along, a certain aspect of the supply chain? A shipment is going to be late. You wanted to inform people. So making information available is extremely important. Connecting with people. In the old days, the only people you knew inside your organization were the people you were introduced to in your office, and then maybe if you looked at an org chart, who the same people are that reported to your manager. But inside a social network, you're able to connect with people all across the world, all across time zones and geographies, people that have similar interests or knowledge levels, people that answer questions or reply to conversations that you're part of. You start to have this sort of hive mentality where your company's knowledge is the knowledge of everyone, not just discrete little sets of information. So connecting with
Alan?
I believe we've lost Alan's audio for a moment.
Yeah, let me just contact him quickly. Give me a second.
Hi, everyone. My apologies. I am back. Sorry for the slight delay on the phone here. So let me pick up where we are. Thank you, Trevor, for moving my slides on. So the last one, and I'll move on quickly here because we want to get to the meat of the presentation, is that these collaboration tools are really about improving business processes. You don't want to just be sharing information and news. You want to figure out how they link to the things you do at work. No one goes to work to be social. It's my favorite sort of way of looking at this. Nobody has a title of I am the social person at work. You're an accountant or an engineer or finance or marketing or supply chain or manufacturing floor or customer service, whatever you happen to do. How can these tools enhance the way you do your job is what we're going to look at for the next few minutes. Now, from a user interface perspective, what we're looking at here is sort of an activity stream. This is the new style of work as opposed to your inbox. This is just like a Facebook sort of like interface where there's posts and replies. But where it gets really powerful at work is when it's not just people inputting information, but it's your systems inputting information. That's what I want you to take away from the slide. This is when your CRM systems and your supply chain systems and your inventory control and your customer support tickets are posting messages automatically for people to have conversations around. When this starts to happen, it's what I call socially enhanced enterprise software. This is the generation we want to achieve. This is where the true value starts to take place. This is where it's the tools you know and use and love today, but they're made better by all of the aspects of collaboration. And let's take a look at what I mean by that. So instead of just having sort of a Facebook-like stream, imagine it's the tools that you used already. Your supply chain, your sales, your marketing, your engineering, your HR onboarding systems, your invoicing tools for finance, your learning and education tools. What if all of these tools, right in the context of what you were doing, gave you the ability to share feedback, share files, share links, share news, share recommendations? What if all of these tools were augmented with all of the great aspects of the things we're seeing in collaboration today? And that's what we start to see on this slide here. We start to take a look at, what if you were inside a customer record and it had an activity stream? What if you were inside a marketing campaign or a support ticket or an inventory ordering form? What if all of these tools had social features? And you're going to hear more about this from Trevor in just a little while, but I want to take a quick moment here, and I want to do our second poll, and then we're going to move on. I want to ask you each, inside your organization, everything I just talked about, this social networking stuff, where do you stand with it? Is your organization currently planning on using these? Are you looking at using it, or you definitely want to do it, but you haven't chosen a vendor yet? Have you already tried it, but it didn't really catch on? That counts too. I'd love to hear about that. So let's just take a moment and think about this. You know, your day at work, has it changed over the last few years? Are you still focused on email and attaching big Excel spreadsheets, or has your organization adopted tools that have all of these collaborative features of commenting and liking and sharing and video embedding? You know, has your organization changed? I'm going to give you just a few minutes to do that. Let's move on here. Now, what I want to point out to you, and you can still answer these polls, is how does this networking really take place? Who are the people? We talked about it's not just an age group, but which divisions are actually doing this type of sharing? This is how I want to kind of wrap things up. I want you to start to get a tangible thought of where is this type of collaboration going on. And to do that, I want to introduce the concept of network effects. Now, what we see here is, you know, not many people can communicate if nobody's on the other end of the phone line. That's the same thing that happens at work. You know, from a very technical theory, we can talk about things like Reed's law and all sorts of different, you know, scholar and academic aspects of network effects. But what I really just want you to take away is the more people that are involved, the more impact, the more benefit social networking has. That's not to say it's not effective with 2, 3, 5, 10 people, but it scales the way email doesn't. If you post something on your internal social network, one person can read it or 10,000 people can read it. So these network effects are what I want to take a moment and I want you to think about as we move along. So let's start with the smallest use case, just inside one team that you work for. Imagine instead of emailing and filing, if just your team, if the sales department started to talk about leads, if the marketing department worked together online to create your next great marketing campaign, what if the support teams all worked together to resolve customer requests, or engineering used it to build the next great product? Collaboration just in an individual team is really powerful. It's great. All of a sudden, people can share, new people can come on board, and all of that information is visible. But what happens when you start to go outside of an individual team and you start to go cross-functional? For example, if you're going to launch a new product, what if the sales team was creating all the marketing collateral, or sorry, the marketing team was creating the marketing collateral, and the sales team was involved in that process and said, you know what, from my perspective, my customers want to hear our messaging to look like this. Or if the marketing team could train the sales team by posting a PowerPoint presentation, but then having an open discussion about it. Cross-functional collaboration starts to get more and more powerful. Well, what happens if we extrapolate that out to your entire company? What if across HR and finance and sales and marketing and engineering, what if everybody was involved? This is where you start to all of a sudden have what I mentioned earlier, that hive mentality. You know, beehives, everybody functions together, or ant colonies to create a singular good, to solve an issue. What if your entire company behaved as one and empowered the success that your customers need? What if your customers could get feedback from anybody across your organization? Collaboration tools empower that. What if you could now do this outside of your company? Not just the people across every organization inside your company, but what if you actually started to collaborate with your customers and your partners? Are you seeing this start to grow? Are you seeing the network effects that could have impact of this? What if you could actually engage? What if the people building your products could engage with the people that actually use them? 20 years ago, I remember the joke that to build a product, the style was you slide pizza underneath the developers' doors and they slide products out back at you. Well, today's day and age, those programmers are not locked behind the door anymore. They're engaging directly with the customers that are using their products. They're saying, oh, this is the feature you like and the feature you don't like? Great, let me tell you how it works, or let me tell you, why you like it or why you don't like it. Everybody is able to be engaged with each other, and this is where these boundaries break down and success occurs. Now, I preach about collaboration and what I'm calling this digital proficiency, or collaboration with a purpose, across all sorts of different markets and industries. And when Trevor and Kinaxis first came to me and started talking to me about, ERP and supply chain and manufacturing, I got extremely excited. I talk about how sales and marketing teams can work together, or how finance and HR can work together, but I wasn't a supply chain expert. I wasn't a guru in all of your world. And when I started to learn about the potential for collaboration across all of the things that you do, I just got extremely jazzed. I learned so much and was so excited to share this information with you. And let's take a look at why. I talked about those network effects. Here's a company, the retailer that's sort of in the middle, and they have all of those divisions inside their company talking to each other. It's great. It's better than things were in the past. We're using collaboration tools, and sales and finance and marketing and engineering are working together. But what happens if we all of a sudden start engaging with all of the pieces of your world? The customers, the suppliers, multiple suppliers. To build a product, you guys know, it doesn't just come from one supplier. You have to deal with dozens, sometimes hundreds of suppliers. That's mind-boggling to me, to have to communicate with all of those people on the things that can go wrong and be able to actually add a layer of communication. And Trevor is going to talk more about that. I don't want to steal his thunder. But shipping, manufacturing, distribution, invoicing, it goes on and on and on. And you know these charts better than I do. But what if all of these worlds could start to talk to you? This gets me extremely jazzed up. Instead of just sales and marketing talking, what if everybody could communicate? What if this way you knew when there was a holdup in the distribution network, you could tell invoicing and the customers and the suppliers all at once? What if everybody could have a conversation around it? The potential for collaboration and success expands by multiples. Exponentially, things get better when you start to look at this world. But then it gets even more interesting. What if just instead of your organization and all of the components of your supply chain talking to each other, what if we reached nirvana? What if everybody could talk to everybody else? What if it wasn't just you in the center? What if when one thing happened, everybody could communicate with everybody else? What if knowledge could be shared about compliance and regulatory recommendations and government rules and geographic issues and all of these things that no one piece of the supply chain knows about the others? When I talk to organizations about how sales and marketing have to work better together, well, 99% of the time that conversation is about the same company. They're a bank or a manufacturing company or a sales and distribution organization or consumer goods. And guess what? Sales and marketing kind of understand each other because they work for the same company. Even if they get their partners and their customers involved, it's around one topic. When I think about the potential in your world, where the suppliers don't necessarily understand the rules and regulations around the shipping industry, or one manufacturer in a certain geography doesn't understand the compliance requirements for invoicing in another geography. The potential for success and improvement across all of the things you do by opening up the lines of communication are just fascinating to me. And I hope this kind of expands the way you're thinking about things. And we're going to take a look at it in just a second. Trevor's going to get into more detail on it. Let me wrap up my section here. And these are the things I hope you take away from my 25 minutes of ranting here and excitement around collaboration. I want you to understand the differences between just talking and pushing information down, which is communication, and that of collaboration, where people work together, where people can co-create and share knowledge and meet their peers. You don't meet people new in an email, but you can on a social network. And the strengths and weaknesses of each of those tools we looked at, email, chat, blogs, wikis, social networks, there's all bunch of things involved in this. Now, hopefully what you understand is that I don't want it to be just another tool in your environment. I want you to understand that this needs to be woven into the way you work. Remember I said people don't go to work to be social. They go to work to do their job. Whichever tool you happen to use, marketing automation software, supply chain software, which we're going to take a look at, all of these different things, build collaboration into those. And then finally, the network effects. Call it the more the merrier. The more success and the more impact, the more benefits you can receive when a huge amount of people get involved in this. Well, I hope that sort of gives you some inspiration. I'm going to turn things over to Trevor for the next few minutes so that he can step you through some specific examples of how these things are going to impact your world, and then we're going to field some questions at the end. So Trevor, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. So I've got one question here which I'll start with because, in fact, it's a great lead into my section. And that is, with all of the sharing, how are users able to filter out important information so that it doesn't just become a lot of clutter? So I think this is the key point to the term purposeful, because a lot of what Alan was talking about is selective collaboration. There's, sales and marketing don't have to share that information. If marketing publishes a PowerPoint or a slide deck, sales do not have to respond to it. But when you're talking about planning across an organization, there's a need to respond, and only certain people have the authority to respond. So now what we're looking at is both the direction of information and the responsibility to actually act upon that information. This is where purposeful collaboration comes in, as opposed to purely collaboration. So if I then look at some of the sales and operations planning, because of course this is the whole topic here, how does purposeful collaboration relate to sales and operation planning? In my opinion, sales and operations planning cannot be performed effectively without collaboration. And all too often, we look at it as very much a push-pull type of environment in which different functions have their actions and then they throw the results over the wall and somebody else takes care of that. So what I've done is put together a diagram which is really from Oliver White, Ventana Research, and AMR Research, so you can see how outdated that is because, of course, AMR has now become Gartner. Nevertheless, it's the sort of origin of things. And clearly this is a key area from Oliver White with their Class A definition. But when you look at S&OP, they define the people, process, and technology and how Class A brings that all together. And that is that it requires focus, alignment, and engagement throughout the company. Now, engagement, to me, is about people being involved. And you cannot be engaged if you're not actually collaborating. The question is the mechanism by which you do that, which then relates back to Alan's presentation is it really just handwritten notes? Is it really just phone calls? Is it email and Excel spreadsheets? Is that the limits of our ambition to get much more effective collaboration going? And because if we look at the definitions, you can see that it includes lots of people: executives, finance, manufacturing, demand planning, supply and marketing, product engineering. All of these organizations need to work together to be able to get an effective S&OP process. And you need to use cross-functional teams for developing and reporting. guess what? Cross-functional means that there's got to be some level of collaboration. Have all departments use S&OP output as the plan of record? How do you communicate that? Is that a static PowerPoint slide deck that people print out and put into a binder and never look at again? I don't think that's an effective S&OP process. So the question is, how do you get people to engage in all of this? And then if we look at some of the other questions, it's not just about so-called east-west, what Gartner defines as east-west collaboration between functions, but it is also north-south collaboration between the operations and strategic corporate objectives. And it's about those different hierarchies in the organization. It's about finance looking at things at a high level, and the manufacturing people looking at it at a much more detailed level. But how is that information all connected? How are their decisions all bubbled up and down through that process? These are all of the things that are really important, and it's not just about the math. It's not just that you have some machine that can calculate the information. But if I have changed a piece of information that is going to have a big impact on some KPI that Alan is measured on, Alan had better be notified about that, because if he's not notified about it and I'm not aware of the fact that I've made an impact on Alan, there's no way we can resolve the problem. And until we start working together, then we are not going to be able to resolve that problem. So if I look at what some of the capabilities are that the likes of Gartner and Oliver White have said are key capabilities for S&OP, it's the what-if analysis, integrate supporting applications. So integrate supporting applications to me is just about getting the data to work together. But then we get to the interesting point, workflow management, action item assignment. So this is about, again, the question, how do you get the clutter out of the whole discussion? Well, in this case, you need to direct an action at a particular person who's responsible for that action. Automated financial reconciliation. Okay, that's about getting the higher level people understanding the impacts of lower level decisions, and reporting and visibility across the organization. But those are some of the key technical capabilities, but I'll come back to those as we discuss this. But if we look at a very traditional S&OP description, we can see it's a very cascaded process, with decisions being made by one function and then transferred to another function. And by the way, each of those functions has their own set of tools, principally Excel, to be able to do some of those calculations. And if you look at this definition from Tom Wallace, you can see that he actually uses the term spreadsheets in the definition. And I'm sorry I did not actually put that reference in here, but this is a diagram from Tom Wallace. But we also see a plethora, a huge number of underlying systems, and this is within a single organization. In many cases, we're working with customers who have 10, 15 systems of record, and I mean ERP systems, and now trying to be able to do a enterprise-wide S&OP is extremely difficult to get this across, operational across the entire organization. Particularly if we now start looking at how a executive would want to make a change within a decision process or within a discussion, and say they want to increase demand in Asia by 5% to compensate for a drop of revenue in Europe, we can see that that goes to data gathering, where demand managers or planners have to go through a series of questions of what it is that they could do to actually boost that information, which then means they need to transfer the information back up through different solutions, so that the supply manager or the planner then goes through their section of evaluation without being able to refer to the initial discussions. And what about all of the assumption capture that's so important in being able to transfer this information and the reasons why people are making decisions and suggesting certain actions. And then it's got to go back to the inventory planner to look at raw material, WIP, and finished goods and decide how to adjust that, and so on and so forth. It just goes through a cascade of decisions to eventually come back to the executive S&OP environment, which they then ask a different question to anything else that other people have considered. So the key point here is, how long does this take? And is this really the most effective way of getting a decision made within all of the organizations so that people can actually make a decision very quickly based upon the latest information? And where does collaboration come into that? So first of all, collaboration does come in terms of being able to link all of that information together and be able to work out consequence of any change in one piece of information. So the person who's made that information might not know the direct consequence, but might actually get a feedback to understand that when they change that information, there's a certain amount of risk associated with that plan. For example, if a demand planner decides to run a promotion or marketing manager, they might get an indication to say that only 50% of that promotion expected uplift is going to be satisfied because there's some capacity constraint. They don't need to know where the capacity constraint is or anything else like that, but they should be aware of the risks associated with making that change. And then the system should automatically identify who that person is that's responsible for the capacity that's leading to the shortfall. And then those people need to get together to work out whether or not this is a resolution. Does this mean that they need to have additional capacity, or what's the cost? Does that justify the promotion? Or does this mean that this is the wrong time to run the promotion, but maybe what they're really, the organization's really fighting for is market share, in which case they might be willing to take a smaller gross margin in order to be able to protect their market share. These are contextually based decisions that cannot be just evolved to an to a machine, and more importantly, it requires trade-off across organizations, which in turn then relies on collaboration between people so that they understand the assumptions people are making, the reasons for making those assumptions, and then arriving at a consensus decision. This is what S&OP is all about. It's not about getting into a room once a month and looking at 4 alternatives that people have evaluated 4 weeks ago and now out of date. It is about bringing this much more proactively. So what are the core issues that we see are driving the adoption of S&OP? Because we've got to, I think, all admit in the last 4 years, there's been a tremendous increase in interest in S&OP. So what do we hear people tell us is the reason for this? Well, complexity is absolutely number one in all of this discussion. And I would say that it's very much driven in reverse order to what we see here, starting with emerging markets and expansion into that. And, you know, is China really an emerging market? I don't know. Its economy is the second largest in the world today, so it doesn't feel very emerging to me, yet it's still classified in that environment. I'd say it's very high growth, and many organizations are trying to get into there, but this has added tremendous complexity to the distribution chain, which in then leads to an increased complexity of their product portfolio, because now what the Chinese want to buy is not necessarily what the Germans want to buy. And by the way, what the Germans want to buy is not necessarily what the Canadians want to buy. So the product portfolio starts expanding tremendously. And then there's dealing with the regulations in all of these countries and how those things all interact. So this is a key area for a complexity increase, which all leads to less predictable demand. Because now you've got a lot more products or a lot more configurations or revisions of those products that are going out to much wider distribution channels, and as a consequence, the volatility is going up from a demand perspective. Then when they try and look at this from how do they get their hands on and consistent view of all of the information across their supply chain and know what's going on, they have a lack of visibility across the supply chain because they have multiple independent systems. In many cases, the planning solutions that were deployed in the 1990s and early 2000s, they stem from an era where people were developing functionally based solutions for demand planning, for inventory optimization, for distribution planning, for capacity planning, with little connectivity between them when in fact the supply chain is all interconnected. And then when we look at how much time employees spend on non-value-added data collection, this is a key area. And if you saw the first part of the Tom Wallace description is about gathering data. Well, it has to be if you've got all of these different systems. And then we get to the point of immature S&OP processes, and this is, I think, where I want to point out the purposeful collaboration again, because we do tend to consider the idea that knowledge is power, and this was one of the other questions of how do you get people to move from that, because they are at that point of controlling their destiny because they have the knowledge and they're only going to eke out a little bit of information. That, to me, is a very immature S&OP process, and we can only get people to move from that position by showing them the benefits to them of knowing that what the other information is going to be providing to them to add to their value, such as the demand planner sharing their demand plan and getting much more frequent and much more rapid feedback on whether or not that demand plan is feasible, whether it can be met. Those are the things that people will gravitate towards. And the result, amongst others, is that we've got service levels that are below target, excess and obsolete inventory, and asset utilization imbalances, either too much or too little capacity all over the place. And this just draws an immense amount of profitability out of the organization. So these are the things they're trying to achieve. And ultimately, you know, the key thing about the supply chain decisions are they're multifaceted. And most certainly, if we look at S&OP, we look at corporate trade-offs around growth, revenue, cost of goods sold, and down into investment trade-offs around R&D strategy and investment, which is all about the portfolio, asset strategy, which is all about what facilities and how much equipment you have and how much inventory you're going to keep. These are all trade-offs that need to be performed, and then you get to supply chain trade-offs, which is about forecast accuracy, customer service, inventory. These are all interconnected. They're not separate, and these then lead to a lot of the waste because there's an imbalance in the way in which people are managed. And the unfortunate point is that in many cases, a function is measured on a single metric, principally. Very often there might be more metrics around, but principally sales is on revenue attainment, but very seldom on profitability. They might make very different decisions if they're measured on revenue and profitability. So these are the types of questions we need to look at. So when we look at supply chains across all industries, what they're looking to address is that they are being faced by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. There's no one right answer. And this drives people crazy because they're looking to have an easy answer, but there is no easy answer. What people are trying to do is reduce that uncertainty or the need for uncertainty by being a lot more agile, by being able to observe, orient, decide, and act a lot more quickly, which really, in turn, provides that increased visibility, agility, and alignment. But this can only be achieved by collaboration across organizations. But it has to be directed collaboration. It's not just independent. So if we rethink S&OP, it's not about improving the accuracy of the forecast and reducing the amount of uncertainty in the future. What it's really about is eliminating that need for certainty. So this is not my terminology. I love this quote. It's from this Roland Ball from Eli Lilly, which I heard about 2 weeks ago at a conference. This is the central point, and it's about how people then work with that uncertainty, because this requires a lot more sharing of information. So if we redefine what the S&OP can look like from a Kinaxis perspective, is you've got all of those capabilities end-to-end, all in a single solution, all tied together, with people all working off the same information, with them understanding what has changed at any moment of time. And when anybody changes a piece of information or an external piece of information comes in that says their previous assumptions and presumptions were incorrect, that information can immediately be spread across the organization, and the impacts, the outcomes of that change can be directed to certain people to understand that there's some action that they need to take. So it's not about just broadcasting information and everybody having to filter through this information to find it. The system has to filter down the information and direct an outcome to a particular person to act upon it. So the key process difference is that it's collaborative, it's continuous, and by continuous I mean across horizons, across time, across organizations. and it's concurrent, meaning that people can work together simultaneously across those horizons so that they understand what the impact is backwards and forwards up the supply chain. And from a technology perspective, what's required? Now, Alan had brought this out, the term embedded. It's not about having Facebook in the organization. It's about taking your existing capabilities, your existing planning needs, and wrapping onto them a capability or embedding in them a capability to do collaboration. Because supply chain is all about collaboration. And until we have much more effective sharing of information and the illustration of what the value add is to each individual, we won't actually be able to shorten the process of making a decision. So what we require here is process orchestration so that you know who needs to work based upon the fact that other people have finished their tasks, alerts and responsibilities to know who needs to know and why they need to know, scenario planning to allow people to explore alternatives, assumption capture to describe what it is that the reasons that they've made changes, balanced scorecard to be able to say, if we put these 4 different scenarios together, what is going to be the best decision, and voting structures around that so people can capture why they made their decision, and that then all leading to a full audit trail so that people actually understand why decisions were made and actually can refer back to that at a later stage as a process of organizational learning. So in closing, really, the key thing here is that this is a statement from Kevin O'Mara from SEM World, and that is that uncertainty has long been the supply chain's enemy. But business leaders hoping to succeed in this new era must learn to make it a friend. Agility is the answer. And my response is that purposeful collaboration is the means to achieve that agility, because it's not just agility of calculating numbers faster. It's the agility of arriving at a decision, a consensus decision, that reflects the business needs against the reality of today's environment and allows people to actually share and agree on what the course of action is going to be. And ultimately, it comes down to our strapline of knowing sooner and acting faster. So with that, I'll hand it over to Q&A, and Alyssa, if you can actually take us through some of those.
Hey, Trevor, while we're queuing up the first question, I just want to add one little thing here. I think one tidbit I want to squeeze in, I know we're short on time, that I think I didn't touch on, and while I was watching your presentation, my brain is just going 1,000 miles a minute here. I'm so excited. It's not just all of the things you and I said about the ability to be more agile and get an answer quicker and find an expert. One of the beauties of all these things is that everything that's done through this process can now be repeatable and found later. So it's not just about doing it the one time, but by doing these things openly and collaboratively, you can then go back and repeat or find the answer to that later, or other people can do it, not just you repeating what you did the following year. And I think that's a huge aspect of all of this. And there's so much potential here.
Yes, good. Thanks, Elisa. Can you open up the Q&A?
Yes, certainly. So, Trevor, we do have a question from the audience for you. And the question is, we are already using an enterprise networking tool to share files and company updates. Can this be leveraged for purposeful collaboration in the context of S&OP?
Well, it would be a start, but my honest opinion is it doesn't have that concept of purposeful collaboration. So it's about having that willful sharing of information, but not directed sharing of information. So it's not in the context of making a decision. So the key point of what the embedded capabilities is about is that the system helps you with that collaboration, as opposed to you needing to extract information from one system and post it somewhere else and then tell somebody that you've posted it there. That is not going to be, in the long term, the best solution. But undoubtedly, it's better than having nothing at all. So it's a start, but it was most certainly not a very mature capability.
Okay, and a follow-up question to that is someone who already has several tactical planning tools, and can those be leveraged for effective S&OP?
Oh boy. So what I'd say is that, strictly speaking, not. Most certainly, again, it's a starting point. I would never recommend a total rip and replace of anything that's out there. But the idea that you can put a thin layer on top of a tactical planning capability is that the fallacy of that concept is that you cannot run S&OP purely at the volume level. And you could most certainly get some of the revenue representation correct and close and all of that sort of stuff, but you're not going to get the cost and therefore the margin correct, because the cost and margin are all related with the details of how you actually manufacture those items, what transportation routes you use, all of these types of things. That is down at the so-called mix level. So you need to be able to do the so-called north-south integration as much as you need to be able to do the east-west integration across functions. You need to be able to do it across the hierarchies and detail of planning, and typically the tactical planning solutions do not provide the upper levels, and pure S&OP overlay solutions do not provide the lower level. So what happens in those cases is a tremendous amount of translation that's required to move between those different planning layers, with much information being lost between the seams.
Great. We are running a little bit over time, but we do have a couple of more questions from the audience, which we'll try to address. One question, I think that this is for both of you, is how do you tackle the issue of politics, which is unfortunately a huge part of the work environment when looking at purposeful collaboration?
Alan, I think I'll leave you to start that one.
Sure, absolutely. I'll jump in there. And this could be a webinar of its own, so let me try to give a quick answer. I think one of the most important things is, for the success of sharing and collaboration, we talked about this concept of culture. And we talked more about the employees. We didn't talk about the entire company's culture. We need an executive team that is open to the fact that people are sharing information. And to do that, you have to address what their concerns would be. And their concerns tend to focus around things like security, compliance, and reputation, and things like that. And what you have to do is you have to have rules in place that say, you know, these are the type of things we're going to be able to discuss. These are the things we're not going to discuss. These are the measurements we're going to provide back to the executives to show the effectiveness. You have to get executive buy-in for these tools to actually be used. And the most important thing is not just to get them to approve the projects, but to get them to be involved in the projects. From the highest level down, get the entire CXO level team, the CEO, the CIO, the COO, involved. Get them sharing their status updates of what they're working on and what they're doing inside the organization. Make them become human faces to the organization. And I don't mean starting externally. I mean at least internally with employees. And when they start to see the benefits they can get from connecting with people that they hadn't in the past, or getting feedback that they hadn't, I think you're going to start to see some of those political issues go away. You know, there's other political issues around the cost of these tools and things that, you know, I don't have time to go into here, but I would really say executive buy-in is critical to the success of one of these rollouts.
Great. As a follow-up to that question, Alan, you talk a lot about sharing information, but what security implications does this have?
There you go. Great follow-on. I actually just mentioned security a second ago. The short version of what I would say, I get a lot of worry about security. And I would say that all of the things that are happening and are taking place inside social networks, file sharing and status updates and collaboration tools and things, in many ways can be more secure than what's going on hidden inside your email inboxes today. When things are happening in the open, you have the self-governing policies of all of your employees that can come back and say, oops, you know, this should be deleted, or this should be removed, or flag this for information. You also have the assurance that the people are who they say they are. The IDs that they're using on the system are their corporate directory IDs. So when I post something on my social network, it is coming from Alan. I'm not forwarding an email to an external body and it leaving my system. All of these tools also, just so everyone knows, have compliance, you know, products built in where you can search for things or remove things and keep them for legal ramification. And all of the things we've spent 20 years building up sort of in the email world exist for social networking tools as well, whether it's a SharePoint or an IBM Connections or a Jive, or being built into the purposeful collaboration tools that we're talking about, when things are built in, or as Trevor used the great word, embedded, all of those rules can apply as well. So I think security is something that has to be discussed but not worried about. But again, longer conversation than just here.
So Alan, just a quick follow-up. I see somebody's asking, so what is the Kinaxis solution? Something like a chat room. No, it's absolutely not. It's a planning solution that includes chat room-like capabilities. So that's the whole point of it being embedded. It's not a social networking tool. It is a planning tool that includes those capabilities for people to perform that purposeful collaboration. So being getting an alert about an issue that they need to address, but it wasn't something that they changed, somebody else changed it, so now they need to get with that other person in order to be able to resolve the issue, because until they have come to a resolution, there is no answer and no way forward. And that might mean that they need to bring other people in to either approve their actions or take additional actions. So it is all about bringing the context of the decision that they try to make within the planning environment, with all of the underlying mathematics that's required to do end-to-end supply chain planning, into that context of making a decision. And what captured my attention when I first met Alan is this term purposeful collaboration. So it's not just like Facebook. It is about doing it within the context of responsibilities within a work environment where you need to respond within a certain defined period of time with a certain quality. These are all things you do not need in an open social network such as Facebook. There are other controls there, but within a work environment, you have to act because it is your job, and you have to act in a timely manner because that's the quality of the decision. And these are all of the things we focus on, and that's why we have the strapline of no sooner act faster. It's all about making the decision faster rather than purely the mathematics of calculating what the outcome is of that particular decision. Okay?
Great. We run a little bit over time. Any closing remarks from the two of you?
I guess just in my final moments, I will just say that, as Trevor said, when we first connected and started talking, I was not, someone that worked in the supply chain world. I work in the collaboration space, helping customers and employees work together to get their jobs done. And bridging these two worlds together and bringing my tool set, not to just Kinaxis, a company that makes software, but customers that are using it, and seeing all of the components that it takes place to, even for me personally, place an order to the time that order shows up at my house, and thinking of all of the places collaboration can help along that line is just extremely, exciting and opportunistic, and something that I think, I'm excited to speak to all of you about if you ever have any future questions. So from my perspective, thank you for joining, and I'll let Trevor close out.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We've kept you a bit longer, but I see that we've still got quite a large attendance, so I much appreciate that, and thank you very much for listening to us. We will respond to some of the questions we have not got to. So once again, thank you, and in closing, thank you, Alan, for a great contribution.
Great. Thank you both, and thank you to everyone for attending. Please note this webcast will be recorded and be made available online at Kinaxis.com. And we also invite you to continue the discussion online in the supply chain experts community, where the slides from this presentation will be posted. Thank you again, and have a good day.